Welcome everybody to our live webinar series titled How Can I Help You Right Now? It will be hosted by myself, Aldeen Simmonds-Thorpe, your business coach. And today we're going to be kicking it off with the topic leadership beyond the pandemic. So a little bit about me. My name is Aldeen Simmonds-Thorpe. I'm a transformation business coach with over a decade of experience in HR, operations, and strategy, supporting startups, scale-ups, and small to medium-sized businesses. You'll often hear me refer to them as SMBs. I'm also a trusted advisor. I've earned that title after working with many business owners and business leaders as I've been able to successfully combine strategy, planning, and action to create real results for them. And today I'll be kicking off our How Can I Help You Right Now series by providing some practical advice and support on how we can really lead our organizations beyond this pandemic. So not into it, not just through it, but really beyond the pandemic itself. So what we're going to cover today, we're really going to be looking at activating your leader mode 2.0. So the leader we were a week ago, a month ago, a year ago, is not going to be the type of leader that we need for tomorrow or the day after. So really activating your leader mode 2.0, assessing and dedicating resources, being present for not just yourself, your team, but also your organization. Adding some more essentials to your leadership toolbox. I personally believe that as a leader, your toolbox can never be too full. There's always room to add a couple more tips, or even to find ones that we've already added and haven't leveraged in a while. And then at the end, I'm going to invite you to ask as many questions as you have, and I'll be more than happy to answer those for you. So we'll hop on in to activating your leader mode 2.0. So embracing who you need to be. And I have a couple of stats that I want to share with us. A recent report showed that 83% of businesses say it's important to develop leaders at all levels. So not just your executive leaders, not just your managers and supervisors, but really leadership qualities at all levels. While 83% of businesses, and these are predominantly small businesses, while they agree on that, only 5% of them have actually implemented leadership development. And so as we navigate leading beyond the pandemic, we've discovered that whether you're an established formal leader, like a manager or supervisor, there are people in our organizations that are influencing the direction and the feedback and the results. And so if only 5% of us are actually implementing leadership development, it really is going to be to our detriment on the back end. And we're going to go through some of the reasons why that will be today in this session. So how can you truly activate your leader mode 2.0, right? The new leader you. And I really like this quote from Peter Drucker where he says, if you want something new, you have to stop doing something old. So a lot of us think of, our leadership skills, especially as small business owners, how we maneuvered and navigated the waters prior to COVID-19 and any pandemic for that matter. And now as we go on the tail end of it or on the other side of this pandemic, what are some of the leadership traits, some of the things that we're going to need to do as leaders to develop? What is that something new that we're going to need to take on and to do? So I have a couple of suggestions for us here. The first one is clear, consistent communication. Now, having worked with quite a few business owners, one of the common and first things that happen is that communication shuts down, right? And I mean, for obvious reasons, a lot of business owners and leaders don't want to share everything all at once. It's hard to cope with everything that's happening and kind of figure out what to share, how to share it, when to share it. But what's very important is that we still need to have communication happening in the organization. So what communication channels are you currently using? Is it an email to your employees? Is it, a Slack group? Is it a chat group? What are you actually using to communicate with them? And how are you providing clear, consistent communication? What new or more effective ones could you explore? I know some companies now, they've moved to Slack or they've moved to WhatsApp. They've moved to texting their employees more so that they can have clearer communication and quicker communication as well. You know, even though as we go through these situations, it can be difficult for us to know what to say and you know, coin it properly so that, you know, people don't get offended or we don't get sued or we don't step you know, over bounds. It still is not a good enough reason to not communicate. And we have countless examples of how no communication or poor communication really hinders employee experience. It hinders your customer experience, because if employees don't know, they tend to improvise. And that's where we talk about those leaders that are not your managers, that are not your supervisors, but are people who are exerting a voice and exerting some kind of direction in your organization. In order for you to clearly lead it, you will need to develop and devise clear, consistent communication. The second piece I want to touch on is empathy, right? A lot of our, especially in the startup space, we tend to be very focused on our customer experience. We tend to be very focused on delivery and value. And quite often the empathetic side, the softer side of our leadership, you know, kind of disappears with everything that needs to happen on the strategic and the, you know, transactional and tactical side. But as we go through something like this, a pandemic like this, where, you know, it's not just impacting our business lives, but also our personal lives, it's very important for us to consider how our decisions and actions are demonstrating empathy. There was a really prominent example in our Canadian news here where, you know, companies have been offering copious amounts of work from home opportunity, work from home support. You know, they have been, you know, activating some of the resources that they have within their businesses to make working from home more comfortable, more, you know, accommodating for their employees, relaxing things like deadlines and expectations of employees, as they've now combined, you know, working from home with also parenting and teaching and all these other activities. So when you think about your leadership as you navigate these uncertain times, how are your decisions and actions and the considerations that you're making really demonstrating your ability as an owner to demonstrate empathy? And the third thing I want to touch on is vulnerability and inclusion. Now, we talk about vulnerability all the time, and I think the quickest thing that comes to mind is, you know, I have to share all these personal things about myself. I have to share, you know, all these things that are, you know, not something I would normally share, but I'm sharing it because I need to be more vulnerable. But vulnerability could be as simple as saying, listen, guys, I don't know what we're going to do here, but I do know that once I know, you guys will know right away. Right? So are you comfortable to tell your team that you don't know? And if you're telling them that you don't know, are you sincerely telling them that and expressing that to them? And how inclusive are you being as you are being vulnerable, right? How are you creating opportunities for all of your team to be supported during this time? Now, recently I had a client who was going, you know, they're going through the situation as well, like all of us are. And I noticed in the conversations, they mainly talked about senior leadership support. So supporting the leadership team, meeting regularly, you know, being very empathetic to the leadership of the team, you know, being very consistent with the communication. You know, there was a daily meeting happening. And I said to them, well, what about our, you know, frontline employees? Like, what about the rest of the organization who's not privy to all of these meetings and all these decisions that we're making? You know, are they really feeling included, right? And I remember the CFO looked over and he was like, oh, we hadn't quite thought about that. You know, we're trying to put the plan together, but the problem is the plan was taking a few weeks to come together. And all this time, the employees were missing that clear, consistent communication. And so if you are going to be inclusive, how are you creating opportunities for everybody to share in the decision-making and to have a voice in what's happening as you lead your company and your teams forward? I've seen, you know, simple things like hopping on a Zoom call and doing a poll, or, you know, having a quick stand up to say, you know, how are you feeling today? You know, we've got this plan of changing communication methods or changing, you know, the team structure in this way. You know, we have a suggestion of changing how your role will look for the next couple of weeks to better support the team. How are we creating opportunities for more inclusive communication and cooperation among your team members? So we've talked about tapping into your leadership skills 2.0 and really leveraging things like clear, consistent communication, empathy, vulnerability, and inclusion. And now I want us to touch at assessing and dedicating resources. And when we talk about assessing and dedicating, I didn't really adding resources, because oftentimes as small businesses, we buy into different products and services, and we have access, communities such as Startup Canada and other small to medium-sized resources, thinking like the BDC resources, Futurepreneur resources. There's so many resources that we already have access to. How are we assessing those resources and dedicating them in the points or at the points of need? So some of the ways I want to break this down for us is really assessing our internal equity. Now, a lot of the employees that we hired, they are not only really good at their current jobs, but they're potentially other skills that they have leveraged before. I was working with a client, and one of our HR leaders also had an extensive communications background. She was in communications before she was in HR, and she had done extensive communications training. One of the ways we could leverage that internal equity is to have her, being one of the frontliners on drafting communications to our team. She had already had the skills. At that point, we didn't really need it to be used. And now she had a great opportunity to leverage it there, right? Who in your team or who on your team has additional skills that can be used at this point to help you through these difficult times? Right? Maybe it's someone who has really great tech skills that can help a couple of your employees get set up to work from home. Or maybe it's someone who's really good at planning. And so having them lead out, initiatives around planning and replanning work and reorganizing schedules, might be a great way to leverage their skill sets and time available. Leveraging what works or what's working. Oftentimes I've heard companies share that, we're going to create a new plan and a new strategy and a new thing to solve this new problem that we've come up with. Well, sometimes we have things that are already working really well. If we have a meeting cadence that works really well, maybe we have a weekly meeting with our team, bi-weekly meeting, a monthly meeting. If we have something that's working really well, maybe we have Microsoft Teams that's really effective in terms of communication and informal as well as formal communication. What can you leverage that's already working that will not just provide consistency, but additional support as you navigate something like a pandemic? And then as you leverage that, what can you do more? Like what else can you get out of that process or tool or scenario? Because quite often with all the change that's going on, creating more change isn't necessarily the answer, or is it positive, right? Sometimes being able to just leverage what's currently working can be a great way for us to continue to be successful as we navigate these times. And the last piece I want to touch on here is dedicate and deploy. Now, quite often we'll identify resources. We'll say, Sam over here is really good at doing this. This person over here is really good at doing something. And we've kind of talked a lot about that doing something, especially in a smaller companies where we've only got a couple of resources. But then we talk about it, but we never deploy them, right? We never go back and say, Sam, you now have permission to go ahead and do this. Or, Melissa, you have permission to go ahead and do that. We often dedicate it, but not deploy it. So ensuring that we are able to identify the resources on our team that we can dedicate to either a particular issue or particular team, but then also deploying it. And as leaders, there are quite a few companies that are now reshuffling professionals and employees from different teams into other teams. So they're dedicating those resources and deploying them into other teams. As leaders, how are we going to be supporting those new team members and really bringing them into the fold as they become part of a new team, right? We want to ensure, employee experience is consistent and that they're feeling as valued resources as they are being deployed and dedicated to different issues that might be different, or different tasks that are different from what they're normally used to doing on a daily basis. So as you assess the resources you've got in your company right now, as small or as large as you may be, what internal equity can you leverage more of? What's working that you continue to use and develop to be more effective? And how will you dedicate and deploy resources you already have and explore resources you already have access to to aid your recovery or to, support your recovery post-pandemic as a leader. Being present. And I want to talk about being present as a leader. We talked about vulnerability earlier, but being present also for yourself, for your team, and for your organization. And I want to share a little bit more about how we can do that. So some people might say, well, I'm present every day. I show up, I'm in the office, I'm online. But what does being present mean? It really means being in the now, right? Are you feeling what's happening in this moment right now? Are you here? Or are you thinking 2 days or 2 hours ahead, right? So are you being honest about how you're feeling in the now, in the present? And is your organization seeing and hearing you? So when we talk about the clear, consistent communication, we're not just talking about the CEO's memo or the CEO's, email. What we're talking about is the visibility, right? There's some really great companies, especially in downtown Toronto now in the tech space, that the CEOs are sending out, videos every week, short videos to say, hey, how are you doing? This is what's happening. Reach out to me if you're having any issues. And I know for some leaders that might be a little bit much, but maybe if you're able to touch base with your team via text or, give them a call once in a while to say, hey, how are you coping? Especially if they have small kids at home. How can you be present for yourself? So being visible and being audible in your organization, and then also being audible and accessible to your team, right? Are you increasing the ways that your team can get in touch with you? Or, are you encouraging informal, candid communication where a team member may be comfortable saying, listen, I had a terrible day with my kid today. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get anything done, right? How are you holding your team accountable? Have you changed any metrics of evaluation in terms of whether it's their delivery or their ability to support other team members? How are you holding them accountable for supporting each other, for supporting you, and even just for being present themselves, right? And then being present for your organization. Speaking more specifically on senior leadership in this scenario, how are you and your team being present for the organization? How are you showing up for them? How are you truly, sharing with them that you're here, you're accessible, you're available, they can reach out to you? And we also want to touch on accommodation, right? We've all kind of moved to Zoom, we've all moved online for the most part, and now we're slowly transitioning back into the office. What kinds of accommodations have you thought about that your employees could really use during this time? I have a quick quote here from the senior VP at Apple, and she says, everyone talks about building a relationship with your customer, and I think you should build one with your employees first. And I personally believe that, because your employees are truly the ones that deliver your award-winning customer service, and they are your customers first, right? Regardless of the space that you're in and the company that you have, your employees are your customers, are your first customers. And if your employees, there's so many studies I could go into that talk about how employee experience really enhances customer experience. So often as we think about leadership, I know quite a few of the companies I've talked to, especially smaller companies, they're very focused on getting their customers, being able to access, talking about curbside pickup, talking about moving online, talking about extending support, talking about redeploying resources to support. But very seldom do I hear them mention how they're supporting their employees as much as they've adapted and mobilized to support the customer. So very important reminder that the employee relationship should really be the first one we build and the first one that we nurture. And as we wrap up with the essentials for your leadership toolbox, what are you adding? Now, your leadership toolbox over time, will get a lot more diverse. And I'm hoping that today I can introduce some new ones, as well as remind you of some of those that you probably already had in the toolbox, but have not quite deployed just yet. So there are 4 things I want to share with us today to add or to redeploy from our leadership toolbox. Make connections. Community is key. So I want to touch 2 ways of making connections. So there's making connections within your organization, where you're really, making a concerted effort to connect with your employees, to connect with your leaders, and to ensure that you're present for them, and making that, one of the things you focus on a daily basis. But then there's also connections within your community outside of your business, and really thinking about something like the startup community. So making connections like we're doing here, where you're connecting with other business owners, leaders who are, traveling in the same boat as you at this point, right? How can those connections in community increase the ideas that you have, and really foster a greater relationship that's really going to help you get out on the other side of this more successfully. Maintain perspective. So focusing on today. So again, linked to being very present, maintaining perspective as a leader is important. What's important today might not be the same as tomorrow, but guess what? Your employees are depending on you today. Your customers are depending on you today. So being able to maintain perspective, and then also being able to make those decisions based on that perspective, that is able to, help you achieve the greater goals that you have for your team and for your organization is very important. Prioritize and focus, right? With everything going on, everything becomes, I need this right now. This needs to happen right now. And it can be hard for us to stop and really ask the question, is it really that I need it right now? Where does my priority need to be today? Where does my focus need to be today? And then ensuring that if you're not able to action that or to support that, you're able to provide that clear, concise communication back to the other person or to the other side to communicate what's your priority, where is this as a focus, and how it's going to get done. Engaging all stakeholders is important. We talked about the communication. As a leader, we can often think about the stakeholders that are at the top of our list. But there are also other stakeholders that really need our support and attention, like our employees, like supporting services to our business. They're also stakeholders that need to be engaged at all steps of the way. I think over the last couple of weeks, we've seen some really great examples of companies that are connecting with resources that are either higher up with them on the chain or lower down, really being engaged. And as a leader, we are, especially business leaders, as a part of our strategic responsibility, we are, required, or it's a great thing if we can engage our stakeholders, not just the internal ones, but even the external ones, and be able to make those connections to create or foster collaboration as we're all in this together. And so that brings my presentation around leadership beyond the pandemic to a close. So in true series fashion, I'm going to open up the question section of our conversation, and I'm going to ask if there are any questions at this point.